Hi there, welcome back. I've just completed this multi-pitch climb, just 2 pitches, and we're getting ready to rappel. So I'm going to show how to set up a rappel, or one way you could set up a rappel. So in this case, the rappel wasn't pre-rigged by the person who had belayed us up. There's a couple different ways you could do that. You can see that in some of our other videos. But we've separated ourselves from the rope for clarity. So I'm clipped into my quad still at the top, which is clipped into the anchor chains. And a quick thing to note here is that my quad is on top of the anchor chains, I'm just going to do this one leg, so I'm still on, not underneath, which is important because once this chain is loaded, then in some circumstances it can pinch me against the rock and make it difficult for me to detach my anchor materials and continue to rappel down to the ground. So my quad is over the top. You'll see it's clipped into chain here. And that's just to reduce the angle to be less than 90 degrees. So sometimes that's an okay thing to do as long as these rapides / malleons / quick links are in good shape and the chain is in good shape. So that's all good. And I'm separated and I've stacked my rope off to the side. So it's in a pile with the ends clearly one at the bottom and one at the top. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pull the end off the top and I'm going to thread it through. Now, I can thread it through away from me, or I can thread it through toward me. If I thread it through away from me like this, okay, I'm going to use the lowest chain lengths, by the way. Sometimes you'll also just have welded rings, and those are called wrap rings or rappel rings, and you could thread the rings as well if you have it. Here, I'm going to thread the lowest portion of the chain, and I'm going to thread it away from me so that it feeds off my stack in a way instead of creating a tighter bend, which would be more friction and make it harder to pull through. If my stack was on the other side, then I want to pull it through the other direction so that it's less of a bend going through. And then I want to close the system. So I want to do a barrel knot here. You can do a barrel knot that has 2 loops, or you can do a barrel knot that has 3 loops. But whatever you do, you want to make sure to pull it tight so it's not going to come out. And I like a minimum of 6 inches of tail on there is pretty good, and usually a maximum of 1 foot of tail, so that tail doesn't get hung up on things. And now I'm going to pull this through, but I'm going to do this in an organized fashion because we've got some people down below on an adjacent route, and I want to make sure that when I throw this, I don't hit them. So I'm going to pull up maybe about 30 feet of this rope, and I'm going to use that to create like a weight that can throw the rest of the rope out there. So when I pull up this 30 feet, I can do hand coils, or I can lap coil it and then set that aside. So I'll show you what I mean by that. I'm going to just do lap coils so you can see this. Okay, back and forth, cross. So like I've got my flipped here. Continue to pull that. Okay, so I've got these flakes, like so, and I'm just going to fold those in half, and I'm going to set those off into the side now. Okay, and that's going to be my counterweight that'll help me carry the rest of the rope down later. And now I'm going to pull this stack off to the side so I create a separate stack. Okay, so I'll have 2 stacks side by side, and I'll continue pulling and making a nice, neat pile. Okay, making sure that I don't trap my personal anchor as I make this pile. And I want to make this stack nice and tight because I'm going to end up flipping it. I'll tell you why in just a minute here. So I'm going to pull this until I get to the very middle of the rope. Okay, now that I've gotten to the middle, it's important that I don't lose the middle. Sometimes if your ends get offset a little bit, it can be dangerous when you start to rappel. It increases the likelihood of rappelling off the end of your rope. So in order to lock that in, I'm just going to do an overhand on a bite. And if this is more of a hanging rappel situation, then I could also simply load a belay plate on there, like my ATC guide, and that would lock those strands in place so there's minimal to no movement between these 2 strands, and it's not likely to pull the rope off. Okay, so now I have 2 separate piles. In one of these piles, I have half of the rope. And the other pile, I have half of the rope minus this little counterweight that I took out. When I pulled this rope through and made this stack, it put this end of the rope on the bottom. So what I want is I want this end on the top, so I'm going to pancake flip this stack here that I just created. Okay? So now this end is on top. Okay? And now it's ready to throw and should pay out nicely. The other thing I'm going to do is make sure that this rope is stacked from bottom to top. And it looks like this one will need to be flipped as well. And I'm just going to do a barrel knot in the end of that, like so. And I'm going to also take in those loops. I'll just demonstrate a different way you can take in those loops. So you can take in hand coils, lap coil, or you can go over the back of your neck. Okay, so 7 of those is more than sufficient to get enough counterweight on there. You fold that, place that off to the side, and then flip this stack to make sure it's going to pay off the top. Okay, so now making sure that my feet are out of the way, I can either drop this stack down the cliff or I can throw this out. That's kind of like torpedo style, where you have a line stacked on the or flaked out on the deck of a ship, and then you fire the torpedo or throw out the anchor, and then it just peels off. So I'll show that method, since that gives me a little bit more of an ability to direct the rope away from other climbers. Jenna, are you okay if we throw this rope just off to your right here? Yeah? Okay, cool. So I always try to communicate directly with climbers below and get visual contact with those climbers, or at least be able to see the whole cliff, so you can tell whether you're going to actually hit someone. Okay, and I'll just throw this just like a baseball, and you can see it just peel right out here. Okay, that's one, and now I take my other side, and I do the same thing. This technique, incidentally, because I'm not throwing a large amount of rope out at one time, tends to work quite well when it's windy also. Okay. Rope. Okay, so now my rope is down, and now I can load my belay device. So by putting this knot in, I've also put in a backup knot or catch knot for myself that would jam into my belay device, or in this case, rappel device, when I descend if I should set something up incorrectly. So I'm going to load my rappel device just above that knot right here, and on an extension of some kind. Here I'm using a personal anchor, which is a really great system because it gives me an attachment to an anchor as well as an extension. Okay, so load my belay plate. I can either load it on my tether and then load it into my rope, or I can load it on my rope and then into my tether. This way there's a slightly greater chance of dropping it, the way I'm loading it right now, so you just want to be mindful of that when you're handling it. Okay, and then I'll clip this in. You can go through a single loop and your personal anchor. These are designed to be used as singles, so you don't have to have 2 personal anchors, which means you don't have to clip into two loops on these for it to be safe. But if you like, you can also clip through 2 of these loops like so, and that way if you clip this back to your belay loop and this side gets chopped by rockfall, you'll still be attached to this side, or if this side gets chopped with rockfall, you'll still be attached with this side. Neither is more correct than the other. Some people find that this pinches their carabiner and makes it a little bit more difficult to load, so it's a personal preference thing. You'll also notice I've unclipped from the anchor, but I'm safe to do so because I'm backed up with this knot. So if I were to fall, I'm falling on a dynamic rope about 1 foot before I hit that knot. Now, the other thing that's important to consider is a friction hitch backup, or also oftentimes called a third hand. So typically, I'll load my friction hitch on my belay loop and wrap this around the rope before I load my belay device. And the reason for that is it holds the rope up for me. This is a pretty heavy 70-meter rope, And it can make it a lot easier if I have this on there, put back in just to show this. Okay, I can use this friction hitch to take the slack out. And so if I'm loading my belay plate, by attaching my friction hitch first, I can give myself slack easily to load my belay plate. Nice motorcycle on the road. Okay, and now I can remove my tether. I clip that to my belay loop, not to a gear loop, because if this gets loaded like this, it can rotate my harness around or even tear the gear loop off my harness, so it could be a safety issue. So whenever I'm using extensions, if I'm also using that same extension as a tether to attach myself to other anchors, I always clip that into my belay loop. And I want to make sure and check that there is enough separation between my third hand backup and my belay plate. So here, it's clear there's no way that this friction hitch can bump up against this belay plate and disengage. If this was a lot longer, then it could bump up like so, and then as I'm repelling, the belay plate would push into the friction hitch and then begin to release it. Okay, so I want to make sure that there's enough separation there. Okay, so plenty of separation. And then another small thing that's a common mistake, I make it sometimes too, is this friction hitch should not be holding my body weight. It should only be holding my brake strand down on this device. So if I were to cinch this up like this and lean back on this, you can see the friction hitch is what's holding my weight. The device is slack. That can be problematic because when I try to go on rappel, sometimes it can be really hard to disengage that friction hitch to get myself on rappel. So make sure that it's down here where your device is loaded. So you want to make sure that there's actually tension in your extension, okay, before you start disassembling this. So now I can take out my anchor here. I like to just do a couple wraps and clip that into itself. Put that back and out of the way. And I won't take this backup nut out until I'm down and on the system, okay? I can also, if I thought it was gonna be difficult, take it out later, I can do a quick check here, make sure everything is working properly, and then take it out. So in this case, I'll leave it in, and I'll just carefully lower myself down over the edge. Okay, so I've loaded my system up. Everything's functioning, so now I'll take the backup nut out. It's not a bad idea to use gloves as well. If you'd like, today, this is a pretty new rope. It's not going to braid my hands very much. It's not particularly hot, so I'm just going to go without it.